Alrighty, so for the first episode of the recap series, and yes, that's what is the name of this series is going to call for all these games that I'm going to be looking back at some of the most instant classic game in MLS history. I'm going to look at the double post. And the double post, depending on which kind of fan base you are, if you're a Portland Timbers fan, this probably might be one of the greatest moments in franchise history. Or if you're a Sporting KC fans, this is probably a game you do not want to remember, and you probably don't even want me to continue talk about this game of how much of a nightmare this game was. And I gotta say, this game, I didn't watch this game in person, but from what I remember from this game and seeing kind of the result in this game, I thought this was going to be a crazy game, just kind of looking at the score because, the final score in terms of the penalty kick shootout is 7-6, which means that there's probably a lot of crazy things that happen. And little did I know that, a lot of crazy things happened, including an incident that pretty much defied not only all logic, but also in terms of physics itself. But before we get to that, let's talk about the starting 11 for both of these teams coming into this game. And a lot of these players in the starting 11 for both teams are pretty recognizable because this game was only 4 years ago. And, well, it wasn't 4 years ago, but more like 4.5 years ago and 4 seasons ago. And when I actually do some of those recap video where I look at even older MLS games like in the early 2000s, then I'm pretty sure there are going to be some names that you probably won't recognize, and I probably won't recognize too because I didn't start watching MLS and didn't really start focusing on MLS before the 2014 season. But back in 2015 and in this double post game for the Portland Timbers, their starting 11, Cavarazzi was their goalkeeper back then. Then we got Alvis Powell, Nat Borcher, Liam Richwell, and Flores as the back line. I believe Flores is the only member of this Portland Timbers back line that is still with the team right now. Powell was a longtime Portland Timbers player before he moved to FC Cincinnati, then moved to Inter Miami for this season. Nat Borcher has been retired for a couple of years, and Richwell I think he's also retired right now. I know he left the Portland Timbers, I think, 2 seasons ago, but I'm not quite sure did he actually go to another club or the fact that he decided to hang up his boots. But what I'm trying to say is 3 of the 4 players from this back line for the Timbers that play in this infamous double post game is no longer with the team. Then we got Valeri, who obviously is a Timbers legend and obviously still with the Portland Timbers. Play in the center mid position with Shrewsbury and Nagby, who again a long time Portland Timbers player before moving to Atlanta and now with the Columbus Crew. And by the way, both of these teams actually decided to go with a 4-3-3 situation, which is kind of interesting. Then up front, we got Lucas Milano, who was with the Timbers a couple of seasons ago for his second stint, but now no longer with this team, and I think he's now playing in Argentina. Fernando Audi, obviously he's now with Columbus after his failed stint with FC Cincinnati when he moved on from the Timbers. And Rodney Wallace, I don't even know where he is right now. Like, last one what I heard from Rodney Wallace is that he's with SKC, but I'm pretty sure he's no longer with that team because I remember a couple of years ago they denied his option to extend his contract at the end of the season. Now, in the SKC starting 11 and looking at the front 3, we got Dom Dwyer, Christian Nemeth, and Graham Zusi. Dwyer, of course, is now with Orlando City, and this was back when Dwyer was actually a lethal goal scorer. It's not nowadays. Dwyer is kind of a guy that is trying his best to rediscover his scoring form that he was with SKC, but unfortunately, he hasn't been able to do that, mainly because of injury setback. Graham Zusi, believe it or not, he used to play on the right wing before he was shipped back into the right back spot. And Christian Nemeth was with this team last season for the second stint, but now he's no longer with SKC. Then you got Benny Fairharbor, who just recently announced his retirement. Mustafa, I'm not quite sure where he is right now. And Nagamura is now the SKC2 head coach, formerly known as Spoke Park Ranger head coach of that team. In the back line, you got Amado Dia, who's actually now with SKC after he had his failed stint at Montreal. Matt Beezer still with SKC and still one of the main piece of that backline for Sporting KC. Kevin Ellis, who I think last one what I heard is that he's with Chicago, but I'm not quite sure where he actually is. And then we got Abdul Salam, who will always remember as the player that committed that double post and the player that took the penalty that struck both of the posts. I mean, anytime when you mention Abdul Salam name, the one thing that you will always hear about him is that he was the guy that was involved in the double post. And I feel so bad for this kid who, you know, it was very unfortunate that he was the victim of it, but, you know, at the same time, I think a lot of people will realize when you hear his name, they're going to think about this whole double post game, that he was the person that hit both posts in his penalty kick during the penalty kick shootout. And then, of course, Tim Melia was still the goalkeeper of SKC back then, but something happened in this game to him that was very unique and not in a good way, as I will talk about what actually happened during this game. Now, on the bench for both of these teams, for Portland, we got Jake Gleason, Norberto Paparito, Taylor P, Will Johnson, Maxi Urruti. Yes, he used to be with the Timbers before he went to Dallas and now with Montreal. Darren Spear, who's still with Portland and always known as Mr. November. And I think this game was kind of one of the games that he kind of got his nickname of being Mr. October and November, because he always tends to come in clutch during the postseason. And then you got George Forche to round off the substitute bench. I also made marks right next to all three of these names because all three of these players would be coming off the bench. And in fact, Urruti actually come off the bench and score a goal when he came off the bench, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Then for SKC, their bench, you got John Kippen, Joel Anababa. Yes, Anababa used to play for SKC before he went to New England, and I believe he's now with Nashville after he was picked up in the expansion draft. Eric Palmel Brown, Bernardo Arner, Jordi Quintana, Jacob Peterson, and Jimmy Madranda, who was a long-time SKC player, but now he's with Inter Miami, and I believe Inter Miami picked him up during the expansion draft, or is it? I think that is the case. It might have been the expansion draft, or they actually picked him up during a trade that give SKC some allocation money, but he's no longer with the team, and that he's now with Inter Miami. Now, in terms of the game itself, so I actually rewatched the game last week to see what actually happened, because as I said before, I didn't actually watch this game when this game was actually this game actually happened in 2015. I only saw like the resort, and I was kind of shocked of how many penalty rounds that we actually had to go to before deciding a winner, which in truth there was 11 rounds of penalty to decide who is going to be the winner of what I think, in my opinion, is the craziest single elimination and the craziest knockout game I've ever seen in MLS playoffs. Now, in the first half, Ridgewell actually had a header that was clear off the line by Melia and Nakamura, and Portland were by far the better team. Like, they had a bunch of chances to score early in the game, but SKC did a good job in terms of riding the storm that the Portland Timbers gave them. And eventually things did kind of calm down a little bit, and it just kind of got a little bit even and kind of also got a little bit scrappy, which is going to be the case for the remaining of the game. I mean, I think the first 20 minutes was really the only time where you really saw one team just took complete control of the game and really put some huge threat of potentially score a goal. But the rest of the game was kind of a little bit scrappy, and there were like maybe one or two moments that a team could score the goal, but they couldn't quite do it. Now, in the second half, Dwyer missed a good chance from 7 yards out, and as I remind you, this was back when Dom Dwyer was a lethal goal scorer, and that he is not as as same as the form that he is in right now, where this is going to be something that Dwyer usually do nowadays, where he has a good chance, but unfortunately missed 7 yards out. But back then, this was kind of surprising to see Dom Dwyer having such a good chance, but somehow still only missed from 7 yards out. Then he also had a curler that just missed 7 minutes later, and the game stay at 0-0. And I also thought that, up until that point, even though things were kind of a little bit scrappy, I thought SKC started to kind of have the momentum, and maybe if there was going to be a goal in this game, SKC might have the slight edge in terms of getting that. But instead, that was not what happened, because 2 minutes later, Rodney Wallace would scored the first goal of this game. Almost said he scored his first goal. This wasn't really his first goal in his career with the Timbers, but he did score the first goal of the game from Diego Valeri to give the Timbers a 1-0 game. And then the rest of the game, again, it was very scrappy, and there wasn't really a whole lot of chances in that. I thought for the rest of the game, Portland, they felt like the 1-0 lead was enough to potentially win the game, so they kind of bunkered down a little bit and let SKC potentially put some pressure on them. And SKC wasn't really producing a lot of pressure, even when Portland basically told them that they can, of course, do that, and they were just kind of sitting back. Now, in the 70th minute, as I mentioned about Tim Melia and some interesting situation that happened to him, well, in the 70th minute, he accidentally got kicked in the head by Rodney Wallace. I believe both Rodney Wallace and Tim Melia was going for the ball. And this was just a classic instant where when the goalkeeper come off his lines and trying to be brave to get the ball before the striker. Well, sometimes you're going to see the goalkeeper, even though they're trying to be brave to get the ball, they're going to get some contact off the striker, who also is going for the same ball. And that is exactly what happened here, where Wallace and Melia was just going for the same ball. Wallace unfortunately caught him in the end. It was kind of accidental, and I feel like, I didn't think that was a yellow card when the referee handed it out to him, but it was something that was definitely a big concern for SKC, because for a couple of minutes there was a discussion of whether or not if Melia was actually going to be staying on the pitch. Originally it looked like he wasn't, and it looks like John Kempen was ready to come on and replace Tim Melia in one of the rarest goalkeeping substitution you'll see in the playoffs and in an MLS game, but that's not the case, and Melia says that he can continue on, but that only lasts for 12 minutes before he actually went down again, and then he basically was subbed off. And I believe the reason why he decided to sub off wasn't the fact that, he knew that he cannot go on anymore, but it was more like Peter Vermees. He knew that his goalkeeper can't go anymore, and that he kind of actually barked the marching order of Tim Melia to be subbed off in the game and bring it on John Kempen, and that is the reason why Tim Melia actually got subbed off. It wasn't really him. He wants to sub off because he can't continue anymore, but it was more like his own coach basically telling him that, hey, you need to be subbed off right now because you're clearly not match fitness right now after that injury blow that you suffered 12 minutes ago. And that, of course, is what happened. Now, as the game winds down, it looked like Portland was potentially gonna walk out with a 1-0 victory. And again, Portland, despite they were sitting back a lot, SKC, they provide some pressure, but it wasn't any pressure that you can say that, yeah, they're eventually gonna get the equalizer. But Lord and behold, they eventually did get the equalizer in the 87th minute, and it would be an unlikely source. Kevin Ellis scores from Grand Suzy, and what's even more interesting about this goal was they were temporarily down to 10 men, and I think it was just a couple of seconds ago, I think it was it Benny Feilhaber that actually was hobbled off the sideline to get treatment for a slight knock that he received, and SKC were kind of down to 10 men temporarily, and yet still, despite the fact that they were down to 10 men temporarily, they still find a way to get the equalizer. So that was kind of a little bit interesting, and I thought that equalizer kind of changed in terms of the perception of the game, because From the rest way out until probably the last couple of minutes of this game. SKC, I thought they had the momentum and that they were really the better team. Like even in extra time, they looked like they were going to most likely be the one to score the next goal, and eventually they did with Christian Nemeth scoring from Amadou Dia, and what a goal that was from Nemeth. Like, throughout this game of how I said this was kind of like a scrappy game, and usually when you have like a scrappy game like this, one moment of magic can really change the outcome of this game, and I really thought Nemeth with his moment of magic as well as Alice right in the last couple of minutes before we head to extra time that was going to be enough for SKC to win the game. But apparently that wasn't the case, and in the second half, Portland equalized, and it would be Maxi Urruti who, as I mentioned, he come off the bench and score in this game. Well, he would score in the 118th minute, and he would score from none other than Mr. October or November, depending on when the Timbers are playing in the playoffs, from none other than Darren Aspira to tie the game up at 2 apiece. And I think that really kind of shocked SKC fans a lot. That kind of really shocked SKC fans and also the players a lot, because, it seemed like Portland was kind of running out of gas, and it was very unlikely that they were going to get the equalizer, but they did exactly that with 2 minutes left in the game. And I guess the good news for SKC, despite the fact that they were kind of stunned that they gave up the equalizer, is that there was only 2 minutes left in extra time, and that they weren't really just kind of like, they were stunned, but they weren't really just completely fell apart late in the game, and eventually gave the game away to the Portland Timbers. So with that being said, that means we head to a penalty kick shootout. And as I said before, this penalty kick shootout went 11 rounds. And as I also said, when I saw the score ended 7-6 in this penalty kick shootout, I knew something crazy actually happened in this penalty kick shootout. Now, in the first penalty kick that was taken from Diego Valeri, it was actually saved by John Kempen. And I think this is probably, of all the penalty that was saved in this shootout, this was probably the most impressive one, because Valeri basically hits this one down the middle, and while Kempen has already committed to dive to his right side, somehow in some way he was still able to get one hand up in the air and somehow swatted that powerful shot that Valeri took on the penalty kick away. Like, that is something incredibly hard to do, and that not many goalkeeper can basically already commit to one way and still have the momentum and still have the agility to get his hands up and block a penalty kick or save a penalty kick away that is hit straight down the middle. I mean, that was just an incredible save from Kempen, and the game or the penalty shootout would remain 0-0 at that point. Now, Feilhaber would convert his penalty to give SKC a 1-0 lead, and that would actually be the only time that SKC would lead in this PK shootout, because the very next penalty, the one after Borcher was able to tie the penalty kick shootout at 1 apiece, Dom Dwyer would have his penalty saved from Cavarese, and the penalty kick shootout remained tied at 1 apiece, and that just like that, we saw two guys that usually do not miss penalty kick wasn't able to convert in the penalty kick shootout, and then maybe that also kind of signals something crazy is going to be happening, and something very unusual is going to be happening in this penalty kick shootout. Richville would then convert his next penalty to give Portland the 2-1 lead, but Zuzi would tie it up the very next penalty to tie the score at 2 apiece. Drewsbury would then miss his penalty, and it was a horrible penalty from just Drewsbury, with the way that he just completely blasted that one into the Timbers army. But Matt Beezer basically just told Drewsbury to hold my beer, because I have even a better idea to make a bad penalty kick. I'm going to try to chip the goalkeeper and try to do a Panenka, except whenever you do a Panenka in a penalty kick shootout, you better hope that it actually work out, because if it does not work out, boy, not only you're going to really regret it, but you're going to definitely get some message from your coach in terms of why in the world did you decide to do that. And knowing Peter Vermees, and knowing that he always just goes crazy with some of the bad decision that his players made, I think Beazer probably get a handful of what Vermees told him about that Panenka penalty kick, because he got that one not only so wrong, but he actually kind of lifted that one over the bar, and it was just two really bad penalty kick that was taken, probably two of the worst penalty kick that was taken during this marathon of a shootout. Now, Urruti, of course, would score in the next round of penalty to give the Timbers a temporary 3-2 lead, but Nakamura would score the next penalty to once again tie it up at 3 apiece. Now, Flores, of course, unfortunately had his penalty kick denied, and by the way, up until this point, we were heading into sudden death, so Ellis actually had a chance to give SKC the win at that point, but unfortunately he hits the post during that point, and this was during the point where he only hit one part of the post. The two part of the post would actually come up later in the penalty kick shootout, but at that point Kevin Ellis actually hit the post only once, and in some way it kind of foreshadowed what was going to happen later in this penalty kick shootout. Darren Aspire would then score the next penalty to give Portland the 4-3 lead, but Mustafa would tie the penalty kick shootout again at 4 apiece. Nagbe would then score the next one to make it 5-4, and I think that was the first time in this penalty kick shootout where we actually had two consecutive rounds where both of these teams were able to convert the penalty. Peterson, of course, would score the next to tie at 5 apiece. But up to that point, whenever there was a penalty kick converted by both teams, the very next round, they would actually miss that penalty kick. And that, of course, is both of those players. And in round number 9, and this is probably the most infamous round of the penalty kick shootout, and probably the one that gets the title of this thing, because after Alves Pau was saved by John Keppen to tie the game up, SKC once again had a chance to get the winning penalty kick, and all they need to do is for Abdul Salam to convert the penalty. But then that happened. The title, the double post happened with Abdul Salam first hits this penalty from the left side, and in some way, in just some way, and kind of some unbelievable circumstances, that penalty would actually bounce off the other side of the post, and it went out. Like, I look at that 100 times, and even if I looked at that 100 times, or even 1,000 times, I don't know how in the world does that happen. Like, that must be one, probably the most unlucky penalty kick to not go into the back of the net, and two, probably something that only happened 1 out of 1,000 penalty kick shootout. Like, there would be a lot of logic and just a lot of calculation of how you can actually hit the post twice and hit the post once on the left side and then bounce it off to the right side. But that, of course, is what happened, and to this day, that is basically that penalty kick will always infamously be the title of this game. And that, as I said before, I feel really bad for Abdul Salam that for the rest of his career, he's going to always be mentioned as the player that was involved in that double post penalty kick, and that he was the one that took in that penalty kick. So with the score tied up 5 apiece, Forchiv would then score to make it 6-5 for the Timbers, but Dia would tie the penalty kick at 6 apiece, which means that for the 11th round of this penalty kick shootout, it means the goalkeeper is going to have to take it. And in the first penalty of the 11th round, Cavarese was able to convert his penalty, and then it was, after he, of course, converted, it was John Kempen who need to convert that penalty if this shootout was going to continue into the 12th round. He doesn't. He, of course, missed the penalty, and that is how the final score of this game would end, with the Portland Timbers, after going through 11 gruesome round of penalty shootout, is able to win 7-6 against SKC. And yeah, I mean, this, as I said before, this is probably one, if not the craziest single elimination playoff game that I have ever witnessed. And, you know, for the Timbers, I know a lot of fans would probably say that this was probably one of the greatest and one of the craziest games that they have attended. And if you're an SKC fan, this is definitely one of those games that you definitely do not want to remember and hope that it will erase from your team history because of how just not only how bad this went, but also how unlucky they went, where there were a couple of times where they were on the doorstep of moving on and defeating the Portland Timbers in this game, and yet they weren't able to do that. And in some way, science and logic defies all odds was one of the biggest reason why they weren't able to win this game. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below if you have watched this game, which I'm assuming a lot of people have probably watched this game before, if you of course started watching MLS back from a couple of years ago, of what's your reaction when you saw this game. Because even when I didn't watch this game, and after I watched the highlight, I knew that this was going to be a game that's going to be remembered 5 years down the line. And to this day, 5 years down the line, we still remember this infamous moment. And I think even last season, during a game between the Portland Timbers versus SKC, one of the broadcasters, which I think, was it John Strong or John Champion, but one of the broadcasters even make the reference of the double post, and they even make the reference that under the Timbers Army, one of the concession stand under the Timbers Army at Providence Park is named none other than the double post. So yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I of course will see you guys next time. And tomorrow I'm not going to do a news of the week, because for the last couple of days it seems like the news well has really run dry, and what I'll probably just do is kind of do a recap of that Sports Hub series video where I talk about I witnessed a 10-goal thriller, including a team somehow in some way were down to 9 men for the last 20 minutes of the game and still able to get the equalizer and able to come back twice despite the fact that they were down to 9 men. I'll talk about that tomorrow, but until then, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.